Let's look at healthcare, because we just talked about the market, right? How do conservatives talk about healthcare? Market-driven. Healthcare costs. Fastest rising of family's budget.
You're not a patient, you're a customer.
Guess what? Guess what? The Supreme Court, when they upheld Obamacare, it was the worst decision they could have made because they created legal precedent for healthcare as a market commodity. It was decided on what? The Interstate Commerce Clause. We now have healthcare is now legally a function of the market in this country, as opposed to something that is morally necessary to survive. Eliminating government red tape. If we just get we just get government out of healthcare, costs will go down. Giving families more control. Here's that idea of control. Personal family control. Right? Who makes the decisions in the family? The strict father whose decision is always moral, whether it could be a bad choice. You can make bad choices, but then you will be punished for making that bad choice, which is part of discipline. All right, so now you've got the whole conservative message. Let's listen to, so here's Mary Burke. First ad, working for you.
It was here in this small barn that my father had a big idea, Trek Bicycle. I'm Mary Burke, and I'm proud to have helped build Trek into a great Wisconsin company where nearly 1,000 people go to work every day. But I also know that for too many, the economy isn't working as it should. Good jobs like Trek's are hard to find, and it's a struggle paying the bills or saving a little. That's why I'm running for governor, because we can do better. Instead of the petty politics that make Madison a battleground, I'll work every day to bring people together like I did in business. Instead of more cuts to education, I'll make sure our kids have the skills and training they need to succeed. That's what the program I started is doing for hundreds of students every day. And instead of more breaks for big money special interests, I'll work for families like yours. Because you deserve a governor who puts you first. And that's what I'll do every day.
Woo!
So that goes back to the philosophy. If they have a choice between the real thing and the fake thing, they're going to pick the real thing.
Well, it goes deeper than that. And I think Mary Burke is a wonderful person. I think she's a really nice person. I voted for her, but I think there were some strategically bad things done. First of all, my father had a big idea for the private, for-profit company. Contrast that with Tammy Baldwin, who talks about being raised by who? Her grandparents. Both of her grandparents. The nurturant family model versus the father having a big idea which provided for the family. I mean, you see the subtle difference, but it's a tremendously big difference. Again, she helped build Trek into a great Wisconsin company. Now that in and of itself, not a terrible statement, but in the context of this election, when Scott Walker is talking about what? Private job creation, and that government is bad. It goes deeper than that. I'll make sure our kids have the skills and training they need to succeed. She's evoking the idea of education as a way to get a job. And instead of more breaks for big money special interests. All right, if we're going to talk honestly about common discourse today, who are the special interests? Unions.
If you're a conservative, that's what Walker said.
Everybody understands that unions are special interests. Why? Because they seek their own interests. This is a problem that unions have. The way they act, the way they message, it's about them. So
isn't that personal responsibility?
it is. Right. Well, it is, which Right, which evokes a conservative frame. So if they can't make it on their own, too bad. They shouldn't.
Well,
And then
the term special interest was already,
It's-
it's already under the conservative.
Exactly.
control.
It's-
I mean, they use it, everywhere they can.
It's yep, it's established by them very strongly.
Yeah, so
So
that's reason.
now these are statements right off her website. Okay, the economy. She opened up new global markets, creating good jobs. Somewhere else. Not only that, creating jobs in the private sector. And again, job creation is a conservative metaphor. Took the same private sector approach as Secretary of the Department. This was a terrible statement. Because to be effective in the public sector, in government, she had to take a private sector approach. Reinforces that whole idea. And again, this one, she's the only candidate to have created jobs in the private sector. Again, reinforcing the conservative idea. Again, off the website, education is always offered a way up to a good job. Key to a strong economy. This one I found particularly difficult to swallow. Mary knows that every Wisconsin student prepared to work hard can realize their dreams. If you are not realizing your dream, thank you.
So why didn't more conservatives vote for her then?
Perfect question. Did everybody hear the question? Ask it again.
Yeah, why didn't more conservatives vote for her then?
Because who embodies their conservative ideal? So if she's going,
She was, in essence,
if she's going on the campaign trail reinforcing these ideas, it reinforces him
yeah.
as the authoritarian figure.
So it's because she was a woman.
It's partially because she was a woman, and it's also because it just reinforced that moral frame over and over again. She had no chance of.
Well, I like to just say that Scott Walker's the brand name,
Absolutely.
and she wasn't. So if you buy into the frame, the conservative values, you're going to go with the brand name all the time, right?
I mean, I would argue that when it came down to it, this election was about who was more conservative.
Right, and she was just Republican light.
Mary.
Tammy Baldwin's success in her campaign is something that I hope that, you looked at and.
Oh, yeah.
And made it.
Yeah.
It's clear that she went way outside of whatever that conservative framework was.
Yeah.
She was against, she's a woman, she's lesbian, she didn't let that get in the way. But, she was certainly successful in her campaign. And, I'd like to pluck that, whatever that was.
Okay. She did two things that were brilliant. First of all, she focused on her upbringing in a nurturant family, which everybody could empathize with. The other thing she did was she said, Tommy Thompson doesn't care about people like you.
And she proved it by
And
the clip, and I want to say again, that clip came out of a tracker that came from this office.
And that's what, and look,
Matthew?
No, Brennan.
facts, and this is how you frame facts. So you had that fact about what Tommy Thompson did, what he stood for, and she framed it using the progressive frame, saying, look, he does not represent or care for people like you anymore. He's not the Tommy Thompson that was going. He's a different person now. And I'm the genuine article.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is she had a lot of the same consultants as Mary Burke did. But what Tammy Baldwin did from the start was she was herself. Look, this has to be authentic. You can't fake this stuff. You can't take.
Democrats have a problem when people be themselves when they're running. That's the problem.
Well, you can't take a conservative and have them talk like a progressive because people sense that. There's too much unconscious connection between all of us. It's got to be authentic. It's got to be the real deal. And that's what Tammy did. She embraced who she was. She ran as who she was. And then she undermined Tommy Thompson in her frame. Said, we are Wisconsin is where, we want everybody to be treated fairly. We want everybody to have a shot, right? We take responsibility for each other. I was raised in that kind of a family, right? And guess what? That's not who Tommy Thompson is. Brilliant. But it was just who she is. Yep.
Is playing by the rules.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
We've got an hour and a half.
I have some slides to go yet.
And, we spent a lot of time on the history and looking at how it's done. We need to do it a different way. We all understand that. I hope that in the hour and a half that we've got left, we spend most of our time talking about how it's changed.
Yep, we're getting to that.
I'm nervous here.
Oh, no. But that's good. I want you to get nervous. I do. Because I want you to understand how powerful this is. People, look, a lot of consultants who get paid a lot of money, they don't get this because they don't live in a world that looks at this. They look at demographics, they look at statistics, they look at data, and a lot of them are going to say, we just need to knock on more doors and we need to have better data-driven elections. Baloney.
Well, and the other part of this is that if we're going to message and frame in a different way, I'm really worried that we will frame by relabeling our silos without actually listening to the
Oh, I see.
electorate and discovering the language which resonates with them, which then becomes our frame. Because we, in many ways, are ideologically isolated from the general electorate, whether we admit it or not. And so I'm very concerned that just changing labels, if we remain within silos ideologically, we will, we'll have nice new words, but we will not have changed the dialogue. And we need to grab a hold of the narrative under our terms, which reflect the terms of a majority of the electorate. Otherwise, this exercise is just an interesting intellectual exercise.
But John, I would counter that with the reality is that each one of us here is a representative of a of a community. We probably represent several thousand like-minded people in our congressional district. What we're interested in doing is finding a consensus among 51% of those people, of all the people in our area. And so we can use ourselves as surrogates to propose a message frame and test it before we actually come out with a delivery system over the next 16 or 18 months.
Yeah. Let me address what you said, because it's important, because these aren't just words. Okay, there's no magic bullet. I'm not going to stand here and say, look, if you care about the environment, say this. If you care about education, say this. It doesn't work that way. Okay, that's number one. Number two is, have any of you read Mike McCabe's book? Okay, he talks about we need a new language. He talks about it all the time. This is what he's talking about. He's talking about the idea that we need to get our ideas out there more effectively. So and in terms of issue groups, I agree. One of the things that we should do is we need to have, every issue group needs to relate their issue with a set of corresponding progressive values. And then talk about those in terms of their issue, not talking about the specific facts about their issue, because nobody cares. I mean, yes, people care, but I mean, it's not going to change anybody's mind. And you're not going to win elections by talking issue to issue. So I agree with you. And this is a long game. This can have local effect rather quickly, because how many votes does it take to flip a local election? Not very many. So it can have some local effect rather quickly, but in terms of changing public discourse, this is a long game, because it didn't happen overnight. It's happened over 50 years. So
Is playing by the rules a conservative, or, which frame is playing by the rules?
that's a hard one, because both frames have a set of rules.
Because I thought Tammy Baldwin said.
Oh, she said,
Playing by the rules.
she's talking about that in terms of fairness. So this is where context is important. If you're talking about fairness and fairness of opportunity and then people playing by the rules so that
She used the same
everybody
rules.
has, right,
Playing by the same rules, meaning that no, like, the rich don't have one set of rules
Yeah.
and the
Right,
rest of
but
us have
I'm
others.
thinking of.
so that's in terms of fairness.
I'm thinking of Scott Walker, not playing by the rules.
You could say Scott Walker doesn't play by the same rules as you do.
That's how you say it. Okay.
by Alex rules.
He's Scott, or you could say Scott Walker has his own set of rules.
But that's a conservative frame.
No, because you're in the context. You draw the difference between that he has a set of rules over here and you have a set of rules over here, and everything depends on context in terms of
Okay.
playing by the rules, because both sets, and honestly, playing by the rules is about fairness. So if you talk about it in terms of fairness of opportunity,
Okay.
that's fine. But if you talk about it in terms of, Scott Walker is the authority figure, and we have to play by the rules. Well, it could mean his rules.
Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, you're talking about a process that's been underway for 50 years. You're talking about a process that has been incredibly well funded.
70 years.
You're talking about a process that has been planned strategically at a national level.
Mhm.
We're sitting here in a small congressional, a small Wisconsin setting, talking about changing the narrative and essentially changing cognition within the larger community. We're talking about leading thought
Mhm.
in this process.
That's right.
But
Right.
we need to be very clear about that. We're talking about leading how people think
Right.
about things.
And it's not.
Isn't that what you want to do?
And that is wonderful in one sense,
Okay.
and extremely dangerous in another if you're a liberal progressive, right?
But it's not.
No, it's well.
It's not about being dishonest. It's not about fooling people. It's about saying the truth in a way that triggers our
So-
natural empathy that we're born with, as opposed to.
So do you think? Here's a question. Do you think that everything conservatives communicate is dishonest?
Not on purpose.
No.
Okay.
Warped, but not designed.
Well, it doesn't align with your values.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But we're talking about leading thought in a situation where we're up against a system that's been in place for 50 years and extremely well funded. And we, on the other hand, are an organization that is extremely underfunded, okay?
So am I.
And we're talking about leading thought. And I guess my question to you is, all right, we can do this on a small scale here. We can be thoughtful people. We can lead thought in our communities.
Okay.
But how does this become nationalized?
It starts here, just like it did for conservatives in the 50s. It started with a bunch of meetings with a few people in a room getting inspired, and then it translated
Google
to,
and Microsoft.
I mean, look, one of the reasons I said that we're hardwired for empathy is because if you get out there and start doing this, it can change public discourse with the people that you interact with. So if this happens in places all over the state, if this starts happening at a party level, if this starts happening at a state level, it can translate to other areas. And believe me, George Lakoff is watching what happens here.
Well, FDR is sure to fear itself transform the national thought process overnight.
Well, remember.
So the thing is that it is possible to have a solitary inceptual thought that is delivered that has a very powerful mass effect very quickly. So it is possible
I mean, there's this look.
for a local nuclear group to affect its own needs.
We have to move along, but there's this whole thing about how many people did it take to start the American Revolution?
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, and just
So
That's what the Tea Party
Elizabeth Warren is in charge of messaging for the Senate.
yep.
And
So is
I'm
Obama
not sure
a
yet
good
who I'm going to
example?
vote for, but
Is what?
Martha
Obama?
Lanning,
Okay.
Yep.
going for state party chair, talks about Lakoff and this, right?
Mhm.
She's talking about that, so
So
that's
Whose vision was that? You want to know? That first statement, the about whose vision for Wisconsin? The Wisconsin that should be a leader in economic growth and, right? That was Mary Burke the week before the election. She was revealing her warmth and work ethic. So, okay. All right, so now we're going to get to how do we pivot examples. So we got an hour, so this is good. Okay. I call it progressive past, conservative present, progressive future because as we saw in the past with FDR, I mean, read some of Fighting Bob LaFollette's speeches. I mean, it's all values. I mean, he doesn't talk about issues at all. It's all about values. Progressives used to do that really well, right? Conservative present, progressive future. So let's imagine a moment that progressives had a well-established frame and message before Act 10. Rewind, hypothetical. Pre-Act 10, everybody understood the idea of private dependent on the public, what taking responsibility for each other meant, community, right, all that. Instead of this, it's about workers' rights, right? Because that kind of was the message for progressives. This is about workers' rights. You're taking away workers' rights. You're stepping on workers. If you had a message that reached beyond issue groups, right? Because the whole recall message really didn't resonate outside of people who were already involved in labor. People understood at a core level, right? Conservatives could not identify at all with the message in the recall. But you all understand the idea of small government and personal liberty. A message that was as effective as the current framing of gay marriage. And I want to use an example because this was a deliberate reframing that was done of an issue that changed public discourse very quickly. Okay? It was intentional. It was not by accident. So, here's the message for gay marriage in 2004. Separate is not equal, equal marriage now. Okay? It was about a specific group and rights for a specific group. 2012, the message became love. It was an intentional decision by the leaders of that movement who met in California with psychologists, communications people, George Lakoff. They said, we're not getting anywhere, we need to do something. And they all said, change your message. What should it be? Make it about love. So what did making it about love do? Created empathy over a large population because you all understand at a core level how important it is for you to be free to love whom you want. And for everybody else in your family, for your relationships, how critical that is. It brought together previously divergent groups on a large issue. And we just had evidence of that. Because the backlash against what happened in Indiana came from all sectors. Professional sports teams, the NCAA, private businesses, right? Because it changed public discourse about gay marriage. People understood at a core level the importance of love. The important thing that shows, which I have up there, is that it shows that it's long-term change. It's just not an overnight campaign slogan. All right, we're gonna do a little exercise here. I'm gonna play a video, and then we're gonna identify the conservative values that are evoked in that video, because they're all conservatives, and then we're gonna work on pivoting, identifying progressive values, and then looking at what you could say about that issue. Okay? Just a little dialogue. This video, this is actually my favorite video that I've seen in a while. This is where I think the recall was lost. This is from February 18th, I think it is. Yeah, February 18th, 2011. What was happening February 18th, 2011? Were a lot of you at the Capitol protesting? Okay. This was the first press conference that Walker held after the protest started. His first press conference, and he does something here that drove a wedge between a large population group, and that the labor unions and progressives, not only did they not recover from, they never were able to counter it. And I'm going to play it, and I hope you pick it up, because it's really important.
Good afternoon. Appreciate the opportunity to give you an update as to what's going on, or in this case, in some cases, not going on in the state capitol. First off, I want to begin certainly acknowledging the thousands of people who are outside protesting, many of whom are from the state of Wisconsin. Many more lately have been coming in from other parts across the country. Certainly acknowledge their right to be heard, but I particularly want to thank the 300,000 plus state and local workers from across Wisconsin who, unlike those here today, didn't skip out on work, showed up for their jobs, did their jobs the way that they have done in the past, and I believe will do in the future. And that is good, be good professional public servants, and we appreciate the work that they continue to do.
What did he do? Thank you. He actually said, skipped out, like they were little kids. Like they were little kids playing hooky from school, unlike those good professional public servants who showed up and functionally did what I wanted them to do. Exactly. Exactly. Unfortunately, labor unions went out and carried signs that said, "I'm a union thug." And it became about workers' rights, but it wasn't about all workers' rights, it was about the people striking. They reinforced what he said there. And when that happened, there was no going back. It just strengthened what he was doing. So that's basically it, right? He's the strict authoritarian. He was going to bring those undisciplined unions who have been, cheating the public, skipping out of work. He was going to punish them. So what they got, they deserved.
Right.
I mean, that's basically the message. Okay? So in terms of unions, public sector unions, private sector unions, what's the progressive values associated with a public sector union? Fairness. Think about it this way. Are just a select few of them public servants, or are they all public servants? In the public, they're all public servants, right?
They represent all, yep.
Right, they're all public servants. And as public servants, isn't having them critical to private prosperity in the private sector?
Absolutely.
Right? So try opening your business without the people who are the public servants or the educators educating kids, right? They're all public servants.
The public is the private's infrastructure.
Right. Right. Fairness, right. Yep.
I just want to focus on one term, servant. Servitude. Connotation.
It's different. It's context. Public servant is in the context of the responsibility of the public to provide resources for the private. So, and I've asked George about this too, because I had issues with servant. And it's all contextual. public servant polls really well, and it evokes a progressive idea of responsibility.